Hi, Michelle here. Welcome to Hidden Gems in the History of Music. Now, we've all heard a piece of music that's been dedicated to somebody, or a book that's been dedicated to somebody. Dedications are really important. It tells people that you care about them, or that those people made a really huge impact on your life one way or another, or you did something specifically for them. And there were quite a few dedications made to different people in the history of music. So sometimes you'll read, okay, so-and-so, and then, okay, this is dedicated to so-and-so. And sometimes I think, well, who was that person? I'd like to know. So I have done some digging and looking around, and there's a whole list of people who things are dedicated to. But I just chose a couple in classical era, because it's really the first era where we had the real freelance composer, musician. And before that, as I spoke in another video about the patronage system, in fact, when you were the servant of, let's say, a baron or a king or whatever, you didn't own your own music. And it wasn't until later in the classical era, for example, Haydn had a wonderful patron, the Esterhazy family, but they owned his music up to a certain point. But that did change. They changed it and said, okay, now you own your music that you've written. And that made a huge difference, because if you own it, then you can say, I dedicate this too. Anyway, so there are three people I thought you guys might be interested in learning about who they were. Now, the first one is Barbara Ployer, and she was a student of Mozart's. She was born in a city between Salzburg, where Mozart was born, and Vienna, where during that era, music was it. So right in between the two of them. Her mom unfortunately died when she was about 14, and she moved to Vienna to be with her uncle, court counselor Gottfried Ignaz von Ployer, and that is where she went, where and when she met Mozart. Now, Mozart apparently was very proud of her as a student and thought she was an amazing pianist. He wrote, at minimum, 2 piano concertos for her, which she also premiered. That's number 14 and number 17. There are no pictures of Barbara Ployer, but there is this, which is kind of like a little portrait sketch on the side of one of his manuscripts, one of his compositions that he wrote. I think it's one for 4 hands. That would be like a duet, piano duet. And it's supposed to represent Barbara Ployer. So she looks a lot like women of that day, with the dress and the hair back and curly at the ends. But it's hard to really see what she really looked like, but that's all we have, that rendering for Barbara Ployer. Now, she did get married to a gentleman and moved to Croatia with him, so I hope she had a good life. Here is some of the piano concerto number 17 that Mozart wrote, because he held her in great high regard, and she must have been quite a great pianist. So here's a little bit of his piano concerto number 17. As always, beautiful to listen to Mozart. Now, the second individual I want to bring your attention to is a guy named Joseph Leutgab. I hope I'm saying that right. Leutgab. And he was a horn player, born in Vienna in 1732, the same year as Haydn, actually. Horn meaning French horn. Although back in the day, it didn't have the vowels it has now. It would have been called the original, it's called the natural horn. So back in the day, it was called the natural horn. And here's a picture of what that would look like without the valves. Now, not much is known about his childhood, but he did have a father who seemed to be a violinist. Haydn and he knew each other, and Haydn wrote his concerto in D for him, his horn concerto in D for him. They were likely friends, the two of them. They were of the same age and everything. Now, Leutgab moved to Salzburg, and he met the Mozart family when Mozart was actually quite young, so he knew Mozart from very early on. And they did some traveling in Italy in 1773 together. So in the meantime, Leutgab moved back to Vienna. I'm going to call him Joseph. Joseph moved back to Vienna, 1777. And to get started there, he got a loan from Mozart's father, Leopold. Now, something kind of interesting I came across was a quote, and this is Mozart writing to his father. So at this point, Wolfgang, Mozart and Joseph were friends. So in 1782, Mozart wrote to his father, Leopold, about this loan, which was still unpaid, so many years later, 5 years later. And I quote, "Please have a little patience with poor Leutgab. If you knew his circumstances and saw how he has to muddle through, you would certainly feel sorry for him. I shall have a word with him, and I feel sure that he will pay you, at any rate by installments." So it looks like Mozart had a lot of compassion for Joseph. He wrote several horn concertos for him, which have become, from my understanding, kind of some of the core music of the horn solo literature, widely played today. Now, there's a very well-known rondo from one of his horn concertos. We're going to listen to it right now. Always fun to listen to. Always fun, Mozart. For me, anyway. I hope you guys like Mozart, too. Now, Mozart and he had a curious relationship. I mean, not curious. It was an interesting relationship because they were quite different ages, right? About over 20 years apart. But there is let's see here, a mock dedication, they called, kind of a fun, silly dedication to Leutgab in his K417. And it says, and I quote, "Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart takes pity on Leutgab, ass, ox, and simpleton at Vienna, 27 March, 1783. Of course, he didn't think he was an ox and simpleton or anything. It was good-natured joking back and forth. There's letters suggest that they had a really good relationship, and Joseph was totally fine with all that. And there was even a letter later on that was Constanza, his wife, was away, and he had written in a letter that he decided he was going to go stay with Joseph for a couple of days because he kind of told his housekeeper to leave, and he would have to be on his own, and that would have been boring. So nice that they had a good relationship. So this guy Joseph was friends with both Haydn and Mozart, and they both wrote for him. Now, the third person I want to talk about is somebody named Nancy Storace. Now, she was born Anne, but she was professionally known as Nancy. She was born in London, so whole different country, England, in 1765. She was a child prodigy. At 9 years old, she had her first London appearance. Then she went to Italy for a few years, and when she was in Italy to continue singing Italian opera, when she was in Italy, she was kind of headhunted by Leopold II for a Italian opera company in Vienna. So she went to Vienna in 1782, and she made friends with both Haydn and Mozart. She returned to London in 1787 and sang in many of her brother Stephen Storace's operas. I'd never heard of him before, so I looked him up and I listened to some of his stuff. Very, very pretty music. So there's another person to add to my list of unknown gems. She retired in 1808 when she was 43 and died in 1817 when she was 52. Now, apparently she had a real gift for comedy. Here's a picture of her when she's younger. And here's a picture of her when she's a little older back in London. Haydn wrote a cantata for her. Well, he wrote in the letter, quote, "for the voice of my dear Storace." And Mozart wrote the role of Susanna in his opera Marriage of Figaro for her. So he wrote operas that had a buffa character, or at least one buffa character, kind of comic relief almost. And she had this comedy ability in her, so it worked out perfectly. So here's a video of two people rehearsing a piece, a duet, in the Marriage of Figaro. And the one with the dress on is the character Susanna. Let's listen. Now, if you've never seen an opera before, Mozart is a great place to start. He has these lovely operas with lovely music, and they're quite accessible. Sometimes you can kind of go away humming the tune. So there is a gentleman who heard Storace's performance of Susanna in the Marriage of Figaro, and he wrote this about it. And I quote, "Storace, the beautiful singer, enchanted eye, ear, and soul. Mozart directed the orchestra playing his forte piano. The joy which this music causes is so far removed from all sensuality that one cannot speak of it. Where could words be found that are worthy to describe such joy?" Now, those are lovely words. She must have had a lovely voice. Unfortunately, she had something happen to her voice during she was singing, and something happened to it. Who knows? And she actually couldn't sing for about 5 months. When she came back on stage, Mozart, Salieri, and another composer, they're not quite sure who, wrote a small piece for her to get back on stage and sing that wouldn't tax her vocal cords too much, which is very nice of them. She moved back to London, and you may or may not know that Haydn went to London 2 times. He really liked London, they really liked him. So the first time he went back to London in 1791, he rekindled her friendship with Nancy, and she sang at some of his events, his concerts. In fact, he was given an honorary doctorate from Oxford University, and for the ceremony for that, she sang at that as well. In his second trip, a couple years later, in 1794, they again reconnected, and she sang at some of his events, some of his concerts, which is pretty cool. So she had a long-standing friendship with both Haydn and then Mozart, but of course by 1794 Mozart had already passed away. Now let's listen to a piece that she sang when she went back to London, written by her brother. And this is from his opera, The Pirates, and it's called Lullaby. Here we go. Now that was lovely. She must have had just a gorgeous voice. And it's a lovely piece, so I'm going to even listen to more of his operas. If you hear a little whining there, it's my dog, Jackson. You may see him once in a while during these podcasts. Right, Jackson? He likes music too. Now, one little aside about Nancy is that she was married to this guy who was a violinist, I want to say. I'm pretty sure. But he was not a nice guy. He was quite abusive. And the emperor found out about it, and he's the one who brought her from Italy to Vienna in the first place. And he pretty much told her husband to get out of town and leave her alone, which happened. So she never remarried. She did have a long-standing relationship with somebody when she was in London, and they did have a son together. So those are three musicians, a singer, a horn player, French horn player, and a pianist, that music was either written for or dedicated to. So I think it's kind of fun to know about that kind of thing. I wish there were some more pictures, but nothing we can do about that. But at least we know a little bit about their backstories and how they fit into these guys' lives. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments if you did, and if you want me to do another one like this with different people that were part of different composers' lives. I'm quite happy to do that. Have a great day, and until next time.